Yakiniku Bugyo is a 2001 mostly Japan-exclusive game for the PS1. A promo tie-in game for the Gyukaku chain of yakiniku restaurants. Here's a street view of the one I once visited in New Orleans. The game revolves around serving up grilled meat to pushy customers. Pretty standard dine-em-up fare. It's also the earliest game I could find that was worked on by Shigeru Ohmori, a planner for the game, basically the Japanese term for a game designer, and future director of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. Why do I bring this up? Because I want to talk about grass. Like, actually. In my last video on Pokémon, which you don't have to watch, by the way, like, to reiterate, I'm going to try to make all these stand pretty much on their own, and that last one was like a year ago, but hey, it's there if you wanna. I talked about how I felt like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet were games that clearly had effort put into them from individual staff members, but were victims of years of shitty corporate practices from the Pokemon Company. This does not in any way justify the actions of the Pokemon Company, and they absolutely should face consumer backlash for putting out a game that is, in many ways, to put it politely, a piece of shit. But what it does do is hopefully give pause to the proverbial Pokemon player to ponder over what it is they find so profound about any given game in the genealogy. Genealogy. And I still believe that's true. Scarlet and Violet, despite how shitty they are still Pokemon games, and that means there's still stuff to love in them from people that do actually give a shit about making them. Of course, like everything in these games, things aren't really that black and white, even when they are. In particular, there's one person who makes things a bit more complicated. Not for the actions he's done to harm the series, at least in my opinion, but rather for the ways he seemingly tries to make things better as things, to many, keep getting worse. Shigeru Ohmori. Shigeru Ohmori, born on a leap day, February 29th, 1980, has been the primary director of the mainline series of Pokemon games since Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, remakes of the first games he worked on with Game Freak back in 2002. He'd spent many years working as a game designer for numerous Game Freak projects until that fateful year of 2014, where Junichi Masuda, the company's then key director of Pokemon games, gave him the reins for ORAS and then the series at large, his first truly original game as director being Sun and Moon. What's immediately obvious from his work directing Sun and Moon is how ready and willing Ohmori was to shake up series conventions. Take this interview from VG 24/7. Game Freak doesn't necessarily look back on old games to see what they can improve. Game Freak takes an old-school approach to game design. Rather than poring over user feedback and advanced metrics to see what works and what doesn't, they more or less take each new generation as it arrives. Ohmori explains, "I mentioned earlier, but this is the first time I've worked as the director for an entirely new generation of Pokemon, so I really had a desire to build a new game from scratch while working closely with Scratch. And because introducing a new director is kind of a momentous occasion, I really wanted to use the occasion to rebuild or re-examine some things. I think Trials in place of Gyms is one example of that. Introducing Z-moves is another thing. These are the things I put in the game because I wanted to focus on Pokemon as living creatures, and I think these are two elements that will help express that. But just like the Pokemon themselves, each game should have their own characteristics. So it's less about looking at past games and seeing what went well or what went poorly, it's more just looking at each project as its own new thing and determining what we want to do and how we can accomplish it." Now, you can say whatever you want about this approach to game design. Like, blatantly admitting you don't listen to player feedback is big balls, to say the least. But as someone who personally loves Sun and Moon and sees them as one of the high points of the series, it's kind of hard for me to say it can't work. And I say that because this even applies to the games I don't really like. Like, I kind of fucking hate Sword and Shield, but I can at the very least understand what Ohmori was going for with it. Like in this interview with Eurogamer. How do you go about researching a region like the UK for games like Sword and Shield? Do you base it on your idea of what a place is like, or do you research it in depth? When we're designing a region, the first thing we have is actually a kind of theme. in the game, so this time around it was strength and making the strongest Pokemon game. And when I was thinking about this, when I associated the word strength, the UK came to mind. So that's where we decided to take that direction. But of course, when you're making a region based off somewhere, once you've made that decision, you then have to actually understand what that place is like. So we did actually come over here, investigate lots of different places, visit the actual locations that we wanted to kind of implement, and looked at different places and decided, well, this place would be something we wanted to design an area based on, and use that. So yeah, a lot of actual research goes into it rather than just loosely thinking of an area. Like, even when I think of all the issues I have with Sword and Shield, I read stuff like this and it genuinely makes me want to go back and give it another shot because the deliberate care is there. And that's what I mean with Ohmori. He has that real Nintendo mindset, you know what I mean? Up there with guys like Miyamoto, Sakurai, Iwata, even people outside of Nintendo like Kojima and Suda51, were like, yeah, sure, the choices they make may not always be the most conducive to good game design. Like that one interview with Game Rant where he says Pokemon games still don't need voice acting because having no voices means that the players can kind of create their own image of who that character is as they're playing. Like, that's so fucking stupid, but it's so weirdly passionate and compelling that you're kind of like, oh yeah, you know what, that makes sense. With people like them, people that truly look at game design differently than anyone else, you can at least get where they're coming from. It's always the most interesting way to look at things, and they're always filled with love. Yes, love, like real, genuine love for making a piece of art that we just don't see a lot of in AAA games anymore. Case in point, grass. Yeah, I didn't forget what the fucking video was about. I have a point to make! In everything I've looked up about Scarlet and Violet, and by extension Ohmori, it's weird to say that nothing stood out more to me than this one single interview with Famitsu, done shortly before the release of Sword and Shield. In it, Ohmori and Masuda are talking about the series' jump from portable console gaming, and how the increased resolution of the Switch meant that they could do more graphically. We put a lot of effort into how the screen looked. Creating the lighting and the reflections on the grass was a lot of work. For example, even if we take a single grass patch, it took about 6 months of discussion before we solidified how to present it. 6 months in the grass? In the world of Pokemon, the grass is where users meet Pokemon. In terms of the game, it's the core of the gameplay. There is a grass field, so there might be a Pokemon. Let's go there. So it's very important. How far away, how far apart, and how much should be displayed. Since it's a part related to the gameplay, we really spent a lot of time on this point. And y'all, I'm not even exaggerating, this shit blew my fucking mind. Cause like, yeah, sure, it seems like such an insignificant thing, you know, the fucking grass in Pokemon games. But, I mean, yeah, he's right. The grass is important. It's this incredible intermingling of the aesthetic, you know, the outside, observable beauty of the game that contributes to its world, initial immersion, stuff like that. But also the technical, you know, the interactive, the tangible, the deeper immersion that keeps us engaged within that world. When we talk about big and heady things, analyzing the merits of video games as a legitimate art form, like ludonarrative harmony, I'm talking about shit like this. I don't care how much you think Pokemon as a series does or doesn't have conventional narratives worth getting invested in. At the end of the day, they are role-playing games. Games where you play a role, define a personal narrative. Even in games with as praised and defined of narratives as your Final Fantasies, or your Personas, or your Baldur's Gates, your individual experience will always differ from everyone else's because of the individual choices you're encouraged to take and the individual memories that you will create. And Pokemon absolutely understands this, to me, a lot better than a ton of other games. Because while there are built-in stories to pursue, especially these days as Scarlet and Violet crafts, to me, one of the best written narratives in all of Pokemon, the crazy and amazing thing is that none of that matters as much as the journey you take and the friends you make. That's why you catch Pokemon. That's why you can build up teams and take on challenges with whoever you want. And that's why we have grass. The thing that comprises every step of the way in our journeys and always beckons us to explore it and discover our next Pokemon. Yeah, Scarlet and Violet can look like shit, but they can also look great. One of the first things I noticed when I first boot up the game was how much I loved the grass, how I could see individual little blades, how they blew in the breeze, how they looked when bathed in the sunset of a scarlet sky. Maybe it's the Gen 1er in me, but I can't believe that we're at a point where Pokemon is this fully explorable 3D world that we can just immerse ourselves in, where we can traverse fully 3D spaces, control the camera however we want, and yeah, just stop to admire the grass. I know I'm not the only one. I can't be the only one that cares about this. There's a fucking Pokemon grass tier list, for fuck's sake. And as always, none of this is meant to wave away legitimate criticisms of Scarlet and Violet. I don't even want to give too much credit to Ohmori here. I don't know how much he does or doesn't actually put into these games, in the same way that I don't know how much love or attention or detail or whatever else he puts into Yakiniku Bugyo. But at the end of the day, these are still essentially his games. And that means he's gotta take at least some accountability for how they come out. The bad, but also the good. And I can't deny the heart he has for the little details that makes these games shine. And I can't deny the heart he has for the series. If anything, it's one of the things that still keeps me loving it. There's one more quote I want to bring up, from that same Eurogamer interview on Sword and Shield, where Ohmori's talking about criticisms for those games during the Dexit controversy, one of the most significant cultural low points the series has had since Scarlet and Violet came out. Do you feel like it's quite difficult to please everyone, with things like the Pokédex issue recently, or some people wanting either a more difficult or more welcoming experience? Is there a difficulty or a pressure there? Yeah, there's definitely a level of pressure when you're making the game, but it doesn't make developing a game feel stressful or anything like that. At the end of the day, it's something that we love doing, and is really fun to do. But we definitely really want to answer all the wishes of our fans and live up to their expectations, which is something that's quite challenging. So, in that sense, yeah, there's definitely a pressure. But we also, within ourselves, always strive to make the best game, and really deliver something that we're proud of, and that we feel fans are going to enjoy. So, yeah, there's a fun and a pressure in there. And I don't know, something about this just really got to me. I know some people could convey it as Ohmori and the Pokemon Company as a whole being potentially dismissive of criticism, acknowledging what fans want while, as seen through a lot of their actions, not really listening to any feedback, legitimate or not. But one could also read it as, even though Ohmori and his team are developing some of the most intensely watched games in the world, they don't let any of that get to them. And the stuff that matters to them, that fun they find in the pressure, that's what they're going to put their hearts into. In a weird way, it's emblematic of how I feel about Scarlet and Violet as a whole. How I feel about modern Pokemon as a whole. A lot to criticize, but a lot to love too. Wait, I just realized I still haven't even picked my starter yet. And that's where we're gonna end it, everybody. I wanted to make at least one more Pokemon video before the end of the year, and I know it's probably not what y'all thought it was gonna be, but hey, like I said, I'm gonna really take my time with this one. And for what it's worth, I had a lot of fun making this one. And that's the whole point at the end of the day. Speaking of, wow, what a fucking year. I told myself at the beginning of the year that I wanted to have 4 videos made by the end of 2024, so I could start 2025 with video number 5. It was just a stupid little goal that I didn't really tell anybody about, and so nobody really cared about but myself. But hey, I did it. I fucking did it. It feels good. I experimented with shorter videos on different topics, had a bit of expected but necessary humbling after none of them got as many views as my first video, plus not even to mention starting and scrapping 2 whole other videos, something that I've never done and I never thought I'd do before starting this channel, but I learned a lot, and it happens. Life happens. I'm back in therapy again. Like, I'm actually making progress. Things are finally starting to feel like they're gonna be okay. Like, I'm gonna be okay. And yeah, it's really made me stop and appreciate the grass.